My name is Rich Gibbons. I've been doing Microsoft licensing for about 20 years, nearly. I was 4 years old when I started doing it. So I've been around. I've seen lots of changes. The plan for today's session is to give you, as Chris said, the high level information, so you know the things that you need to know to get started. There will be things which we haven't got time to cover, but any questions, please do put them in the chat. If I can answer them today, I will. If not, I'm sure we'll be able to get to them on a future session. So with that, I'm going to start with the licensing fundamentals for Dynamics 365 and Power Platform. And I will say that each of these topics, if we go fully in depth, probably at least half a day in each one. So yeah, it will be a quick run through. But first of all, I want to look at Dynamics 365. Now, the licensing model is relatively straightforward up to a point. So it's under what we call a base and attach model. So you have a base license that's your foundation, and then other attached licenses sit on top. And those base licenses have to be the more expensive product. So when you're looking at the price list, you'll see there are different prices, which we'll touch on. The base license, always the most expensive. And also, not all products can be attached to all other products. So you do have to get familiar with which ones can build on top of each other. And I've taken this from the Microsoft licensing guide. You don't need to study it in depth, but what it does show is you can see there where there are missing dots. Those are where licenses can't be attached to those base licenses on the left. And it also shows that you don't need to remember this. The Microsoft licensing guides are kept up to date, and for Dynamics 365, it's a great resource to just go and check which ones can sit with which ones until you become familiar with them. In terms of pricing, the base licenses range anywhere from $50 to $180, depending on the product. And then the attach products will be between $20 and $30. So you can see from Microsoft's perspective why there has to be a base license underneath. So as an example, if we're doing Dynamics 365, you would have your base license. So it could be, let's say, Sales Enterprise. So the customer purchases that first, and then they can apply attached licenses. So they could have Field Service and Customer Service Enterprise could sit on top of Sales Enterprise. Or if they chose Supply Chain Management, then they could have Field Service, which is also available in the other example, but then there are other ones which can sit on top of that as well. So you can mix and match them within the rules that we saw. You can have multiple attached licenses on top of a single base license. And then similar example for Business Central, you would have Business Central Essentials, and you could put, let's say, Customer Service Pro on top of that. Or you have Business Central Premium, and then with that one, you have Pro, Customer Service Pro and Sales Pro. So customers, once they have a base license, there's flexibility as to which things they can attach on top. But this being Microsoft licensing, things are always changing. So I wanted to highlight a couple of changes, one that's been around for a little while and another one that's quite recent. So in May, Microsoft added 2 new attached licenses for Business Central Premium. So they introduced the ability to attach Dynamics 365 Sales Enterprise and also Dynamics 365 Customer Service Enterprise. So before May, that wasn't possible, but it is now. So if you have Business Central Premium, you're able to attach those Dynamics 365 Enterprise licenses on top. And word on the street is that field sales will become available sometime in 2024 as well. And then the kind of the other side almost to that change in September, which is this month still, yeah, still in September, they made two new base licenses for Business Central Essentials. So this means licenses which you have on the bottom that you can now attach Business Central Essentials to. And this is if you have Dynamics 365 Sales Enterprise or Customer Service Enterprise, you can now acquire Business Central Essentials as an attached license on top. So for organizations, with different needs, and they have Dynamics 365 and they have Business Central, they're now able to acquire these in what should be a slightly more cost-effective manner. Also looking at license types within the world of Dynamics 365, we won't delve into all of these in detail because some of them are kind of further down the road, but you will come across some of them. So there are full user licenses, which is what we've been talking about up until now. There are team member licenses, which we'll look at. There are also per device licenses in some cases, per tenant licensing, for example, with marketing, and then also per activity licenses. So Dynamics 365, because of its nature, because of the things that it covers, the different business processes, there are various licensing metrics available. So it's always something to be aware. Most of your time it will be full user and team member licenses that you're thinking about and talking about. But every now and then, I used to be a reseller, so I know what it's like. Every now and then a customer pops up with an unusual request, or the kind of thing that you only do once every 6 months. For certain products, you need to remember, actually, this isn't done per user, it's done per tenant, in which case you license the Dynamics 365 server effectively in the cloud, and then that gives you rights following on from that. So the one that I did want to look at in a little bit more detail was team member licenses. Now, these are relatively common, and they can be a great way of organizations reducing their spend or giving access to Dynamics 365 to users who don't need the full license, but they do need some access. So team member licenses, really it's users who need read access to the data, so that they're not editing it, they're not changing it, but they do need to see it. And then certain basic functions, which I won't go into, but they are listed, so there is a way of finding out what those functions are. But team member licenses, they can read data from across Dynamics 365, so from finance, supply chain management, and through the various different Dynamics 365 areas. So from finance through HR, sales, customer service. So when you're working with customers, there will be parts of their organization that this works for really well. It gives them the ability to see the data, but without the added cost of being able to interact and edit that data. There are limitations if the organization is working with custom applications, team members aren't able to access those. If you're customizing tables in certain areas, then there are limited options for what's possible for team members. So if this is a conversation with a customer, there's the initial licensing. Yeah, we can see where that works. And then the next stage is, right, let's get into the features. Can all the things that you need to do, does team member enable it? If it does, brilliant. If it doesn't, then which is more important, being able to do that feature or being able to buy team member? So that is a quick look at the sort of overall Dynamics 365 licensing. touching on Business Central slightly as well. There are two flavors, if you will, of Business Central: Essentials and Premium. And these licenses include unrestricted team member access. There are licenses for external accountants who need to connect in to Business Central. And then something which I think is very interesting, particularly in this day and age, you also receive 30 minutes per Business Central tenant access to Azure AI, which you can use to analyze the data, and as it says there, Microsoft language, deliver more actionable insights. But given AI, it's been around for a while, but all of a sudden, a very hot topic. It's interesting to see this, and for customers, it's maybe an introduction into what AI can do, and potentially opens up further doors later on. So I think that one is quite interesting to highlight to you and thus to your customers. The other kind of user with Dynamics is external users. And throughout Microsoft licensing, throughout history, external users is always a slight area of concern. Maybe it's something to make sure you get right. With Dynamics 365, external users don't need a license. However, you have to be really clear on the definition of an external user. So if they are a vendor or a contractor who provide business processes on the organization's behalf, or they use that Dynamics 365 to manage their business in some way, then they will need a license. And throughout my entire career, I've probably spent more time working with customers to define exactly what an external user does for them, because you have a scope, and then it stretches a little bit. So this is something to make sure people are clear on, because for some organizations, if your external users actually do need licensing, that can be a huge number. So it's really important to make sure that they understand the parameters and that they explain it to their partners, because this can be, and there are cases throughout the world of software licensing where people have been tripped up on this, not necessarily with Dynamics, but with other products as well, and it can be a serious issue. So make sure, my final word on Dynamics 365, make sure that external users are well defined. So that is possibly the quickest anyone's ever looked at Dynamics 365 licensing. If there are questions, as I say, please do ask them, and we'll do our best to cover them. But moving on in the wonderful world of licensing to Power Platform. And again, this can be half a day, probably a day, if I really went into it. So I've built these slides to give you a good overview, with the basis that we will probably see each other again in the future to go into more detail. But for Power Platform, I've broken it down into the products and their subscription types. So for Power Apps, there's Power Apps Premium, and there's Power Apps per app. For Power Automate, we've got Power Automate Premium, Power Automate per user, Power Automate Process, Power Automate per flow. Power Virtual Agents, there is a Power Virtual Agents license. And then for Power Pages, there are authenticated users and anonymous users. So these are the four main parts of Power Platform. There is also Power BI, but it kind of sits aside from Power Platform in terms of licensing these days. These are the four main ones. When you're talking to your customers, it will be primarily Power Apps and Power Automate, but then virtual agents and Power Pages are increasing all the time. So these are what we call the subscription licenses, the sort of full licenses. There are other kinds, and we'll look at a couple of them in a second. But there are, user licenses. There are per bot licenses when you robotic process automation. Some of them are per tenant. Some of them are done based on capacity. So there are again different metrics for different scenarios. But for Microsoft, the two sort of key licenses really, it's Power Apps Premium and Power Automate Premium. Those are what Microsoft would call the hero SKUs, the licenses that they feel you should be talking to people about the most and thus selling the most. Now, of course, they don't work for everyone in every scenario, but they are probably the best starting point for a conversation. And with that, I want to talk about a couple of changes that happened this month. So September's been a relatively busy month for Microsoft. So there was a license which was called Power Automate Attended RPA per user, RPA being robotic process automation. Microsoft have changed that product name to Power Automate Premium. So before this month, Power Automate Premium didn't exist. It does now, and it's the hero SKU, and it includes unlimited cloud flows, which Microsoft call digital process automation. Also includes unlimited desktop flows, which are also known as robotic process automation, in attended mode. So, robotic process automation is the idea of, so it's like building a macro in Excel. You build a flow, a process that does things for you on your behalf. And it specifies there in attended mode, and there is also an unattended mode. And this is basically if an RPA bot is in attended mode, a human has to do something to make it work. So you build your desktop flow, and then there's a button, you click the button, and it does whatever you've told it to do. It sends an email, saves a document, and forwards it to Teams, etc. But you have to do something. If we're talking about unattended mode, that's a bot which does things itself. So it sits there, and when an email comes in, it does its job. Or when a certain document is uploaded to SharePoint or a Teams message is sent, it does its job without any human telling it what to do. So there's attended mode and unattended mode, and again, in a future session, there are more differences. But here, Power Premium includes includes attended mode, and it also includes 50 megabytes of Power Automate process mining data storage, and that is another new introduction. So this is effectively process mining is the concept of looking at a process in a business, but rather than asking someone what is the process and automating that, you actually analyze what people are doing. So you find all those extra clicks, different things that they do without thinking, and build the process based on what's actually happening. So within this Power Automate Premium, you get 50 meg of data storage for that, and we'll look at that again. But the pricing for Power Automate Premium, so it's got these new things in. They've added process mining, they've combined these other bits. So for Power Automate Attended RPA, the pricing was $40 per user per month. For Power Automate Premium, the price is $15 per user per month. So they've bundled some things together, added in some new capabilities, and dropped the price quite significantly. So this is a great reason to talk to customers, either people who have shied away from Power Automate, perhaps because it was too expensive, or people who are using a small amount It's a great reason to go back, explain the changes, and also the price difference. It's, you know, it's not very often that any software vendor makes their prices cheaper. Microsoft did it with Power Platform 2 years ago, and they've done it again. So, you know, it's helping drive more customers onto the Power Platform. There are also add-on licenses, so I won't go through all of them, but you can see here, as well as those base licenses, there are a range of add-on licenses for unattended RPA, AI, dataverse capacity, etc. Lots and lots of things to that you can add on there. And again, some of those work under different metrics. And there is also a pay-as-you-go option for Power Platform. So you can do that for a few different products. And this is, rather than paying for your licenses up front, you pay in arrears like a mobile phone bill or like Azure, because that's how it's all happening. So pay-as-you-go pricing is done. It's $10 per user per app per month. So if people access things, you pay for them. If they don't, you don't pay for them. And Power Automate, it's done on a per flow basis, depending on the type of flow that you're using. So there's quite a lot of information there. I'm aware, and I'm also aware of the time. So that is the kind of, you know, the headlines. I hope that has, you know, given you some information, maybe answered some questions for you. It's quite possibly raised some questions as well, which is usually the way with licensing. But, you know, please do ask away if you have any questions. And then my next piece, and, you know, I can, especially for a Friday morning, I'm sure your you know, some of you, your heads are spinning already. But it's all good fun, and when it sinks in, you know, on Monday, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I know, I remember that from Friday. The next bit I want to look at is seeded app rights. And this is, as Chris mentioned in his intro, the kind of next step up. So, you know, if you don't follow, ask questions, rewatch the recording. But seeded app rights, the first question really is, what are they? And this is their rights to use certain Power Platform products included inside other licenses. So they're included within Dynamics 365 and also Office 365 and Microsoft 365. For today, we're just going to look at Dynamics 365. So there are also rights included within the different Power Platform products. So if you have Power Apps, you can use bits of Power Automate and vice versa. So you have to be able to keep track of what licenses you have. And also, whenever you use these seeded rights, they have to be used within context of the original license. And defining context is difficult. I have some information and answers for you, but no one, not even Microsoft, have them all. So we'll go through, and again, this will be quite quick because I'm conscious that you know, Chris has still got a fantastic section to talk us through. So what we look at here, the rights that you get allow you to customize and extend Dynamics 365 applications when those rights come with a Dynamics 365 license. The use has to be within the context of that Dynamics 365 application, and it has to be within the same environment. And the use rights are different between standard Dynamics 365 licenses and enterprise Dynamics 365 licenses. So what things are included? So you can see here, and again, you don't have to try and read all of this. Different things, you know, creation, connecting to data, storing data, the ability to execute Power Automate flows, and so on. Lots of different things there. And here you can see with certain Dynamics 365 licenses, you get this first column. With enterprise licenses, you get what's in the second column. So certain capabilities only in the enterprise, and then others where there's a limitation in standard, but not in the enterprise. So when you're talking to customers about seeded rights, you need to be really clear on which products are involved and what they're trying to do. So when we talk about within context, it tends to be mainly with Power Automate, and you get Power Automate rights within Power Apps per user, and within the pay-as-you-go option as well. So within the context, so there's a trigger for the flow, an action for the flow. They have to be within the context, so they connect to a data source within the app, or they connect directly to the app. And I'm aware, if any of you are new to this world, this is relatively complicated. But as an example, if there was a user with a standalone license, they've made the Power App, it uses SQL as its source, and they wanted to create a Power Automate flow that read from that SQL database or wrote to that SQL database, or they wanted to use a built-in trigger in the Power App that sends a notification through the flow, that's fine because it's within the context. The app is around SQL and the Power Automate flow is using SQL. That's totally fine. As an example of what's out of context, similar scenario, but with an Oracle database that's not related to the Power App, then that would be out of context, and they would need a standalone Power Automate license. So that is, again, a very quick look at seeded rights. It's the ability for one license to give you rights to use a different product, but there are limitations and rules, and I will happily spend a couple of hours delving into them all with you in the future. Any questions, do ask. But I think with that, and I've run over slightly, my apologies, Chris, I will hand back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Rich. Some really good points there. And yeah, as you're going through it, exactly as you said, questions are popping into my head. What about this? What about that? And we can't cover everything on the call, unfortunately, today. So, all the sort of hard limits, all the things around customer insights, journeys now, not marketing, how many contacts, those sorts of things are a little bit out of context. But we are here and we are available after the call for partners that kind of need help. And that's ongoing as well. Reach out through your PSM. So thanks for that. I'm going to move on now to the multiplexing kind of piece. And I think if we look at the definition of multiplexing, and this is becoming more and more common now. I think at the start I talked about turning on integration and between the data in Dataverse and Business Central. Now, appreciate that most of the partners on this call are going to come from the customer engagement side, may not care about Business Central. But technically, there is no way for you to know, because let's say the customer is using both products, there would be no way for you to know that inside of Business Central, a Business Central partner would turn this on. And if you're not doing both and you're only taking care of kind of sales, customer service, or custom Power Apps, they can turn this on kind of behind the scenes. So understanding where that leaves you in terms of multiplexing and licensing, I think is always going to be an interesting position for you to understand. If you look at the general definition of multiplexing, it says it's the use of hardware or software to pull connections, reroute or indirectly access information, and or reduce the number of devices or users that directly or indirectly access or use a product. Or indirectly is in brackets there, because if you look in the two different guides, you will find two different kind of versions of the text. So we found inconsistencies in the Microsoft piece in the first instance. I think we also, the product terms are the official document. The guide, the licensing guide, is just that. So we also need to consider indirectly in this instance. I think if you look at the Dynamics 365 licensing guide, this is kind of much clearer. It talks about pooled connections using non-interactive Dynamics 365 user accounts or application access in Business Central. Excuse me. to access the system, but only via the web service layer. And then it talks about internal users and devices accessing through a website or via an API. And when I looked into these statements and I kind of deconstructed them and got them down, there were some very specific questions that we would need to ask to work out whether or not we would be multiplexing. The specifics were, am I an internal user or using an internal device? And if I am I accessing the data indirectly through a website or via an API? And that data is then going onto a separate service. Yes, you would be multiplexing if you did that. Is my intention to directly query, view, or input data into Dynamics 365? And am I doing that through a pooling device? And then is that pooling device accessing the system via the web service layer, so a non-interactive Dynamics account, or via application access? If not, I am not multiplexing. The generics is where it gets much more kind of grey area and woolly. Am I using hardware or software to pull connections, reroute or indirectly access information, and reduce the number of devices or users that indirectly or directly access or use a product? That's the piece that says it feels like a catch-all. And it feels, if you go down to the kind of the letter of the Microsoft law, inside of Dynamics, the moment Business Central is turned on, the synchronization with Dataverse, everybody everywhere is multiplexing. And it's just it's a scenario that needs to be kind of avoided and just drill into it a little bit. So I came up with a little bit of a scenario, and I thought, well, let's say a customer has implemented Dynamics 365 customer service, and you've got 15 customer service reps handling the cases. So you need 15 Dynamics 365 customer service enterprise or pro licenses. Let's go with enterprise. And that's $95 per user per month, the equivalent in local currency. And let's say the customer then decides to implement further down the line, completely separate partner, unbeknown to the partner who's done the customer service, they decide to implement Business Central, and they've got 3 people in their finance team doing this. So they use 3 Business Central Essentials license, $70 a month. And now that they've got both, they turn on the out-of-the-box Business Central Dataverse synchronization. And just for good measure, let's add a couple of Power BI licenses in there for the execs who kind of fly in as superheroes and take a look at what's going on. The one source of truth is it's a revelation to the business, and they love it. So they had 2 Power BI licenses there at $10 per user per month to the execs. And this brings around then a lot of questions. And those questions are, do the 15 customer service agents need a Business Central license? Because in theory, they are indirectly accessing data that may be created in Business Central. It synchronizes accounts and contacts, currency, salespeople inside of Dataverse. And do the 3 people in the finance team need a customer service license or a Power Apps license to kind of read the data? Obviously, there's restricted entities that come into it at this point for cases and so on and so forth. I think, and then kind of do the C-level execs need a Business Central license? So the 3 people in the finance team don't need a customer service license. They may need a Power Apps license in this instance, and may is the key thing. But customer service agents, do they need a Business Central license? Are they actually using Business Central? Are they using that product? No, they're not. And there is a business benefit at this point, but there's no user benefit. And I think that's one place where you can look to clearly differentiate, because the answer is both yes and no. And that's where the debate begins. But would the customer service reps benefit from having a Business Central license? The answer is clearly no, because they do not do any of the functions inside of Business Central. So if they're only accessing, accounts, which is kind of shared data in to us, that is not multiplexing. That is not what multiplexing was designed for. Do the 2 C-level execs need a Business Central license? Yes, they do, because they're reading the data from Business Central. So on top of the Power BI license, they would absolutely need a Business Central license. I guess the next thing we thought about was, what if those C-level execs also needed access? They loved the reports, and they started doing that on customer service as well. And we know that the case table is a restricted entity, but in this scenario, the execs aren't creating or updating or deleting rows from the table. So again, they don't need a customer service license. It's interesting. To read the data from the Dataverse table, they would only need to license themselves with an appropriate Power Apps license. So per user or per app premium, as it's kind of now called, would be the smart way to do that. So these are the kinds of scenarios. And if you start to extend on these as well, it only gets more and more complicated. And let's say the customer now are loving what's going on, and they decide they want to add Dynamics 365 sales. And they've got kind of 5 salespeople now handling new and existing businesses, and they're continuing to read data from Dataverse. They're creating new accounts, they're updating existing accounts, and those are also being synchronized in Business Central. We're in the same scenario here as we are with the customer service reps. And Microsoft do this base and attach license, right? So if they did need to use Business Central, attach a Business Central license. Because they don't, we're probably looking at okay. It becomes, so do they need a Business Central license? Same as the customer service, we don't think, and we don't think the finance people really need a sales license. They're not going to get the user benefit. So let's say they then start to bring in automation. We're talking here about Power Automate, of course, and they decided to use Power Automate for a credit check. So they had a custom field to the Dataverse environment. It's a credit check. It's a yes/no tick box, and they create a flow that can be ran either in the context of a user or via a trigger, and which talked about in context of in there. And that's directly sent to the finance team alias, so an email alias from them as a user. And the email it's received by the finance team. They run the credit check and they reply via email to the account owner know that it's been processed. So back it goes. In that issue again, you're not kind of breaking any of the in context rules, because the Power Automate license in context is allowed to do that from Dynamics 365 Sales, and you're in an email reply kind of zone and perspective there. So whether it's run as a user, whether it's run via trigger, in context of covers you there. The next thing is, what if there's a data reply? So let's say the customer, they love the system, they've been thinking about workflows and automation, we know this, but now they add 2 custom fields to the Dataverse environment, the credit checkbox, but also a credit limit box. They create that flow again. This time, they also create a custom BC extension, and they add a credit limit field. So it's kind of an additional field, and that data is then updated in the synchronization and works between the two, because that field only then exists. The field exists in both places, and this is where it gets to be a real grey area. And this is completely undocumented by Microsoft. There is no answer at this point as to whether or not you are multiplexing or not. It's not in any of the documentation. I think safe to assume that for all intents and purposes, that's not what multiplexing was designed to stop. And if Business Central was built on Dataverse, like the rest of the Business Central applications, and it was a module on the left-hand side, I don't think Microsoft would be saying, left-hand side of that diagram, Microsoft surely wouldn't be saying you need to have a Business Central license now for all of your customer service people or all of your sales people and so on and so forth. So it doesn't feel like it's multiplexing once again to us. The middle bit just changed. Out of the box Business Central Dynamics 365 sales synchronization. There's 2 levels of synchronization. You can turn on Dataverse, accounts, contacts, currency, salespeople, or you can also turn on sales. This also syncs items, so products, opportunities, sales invoices, order headers, order lines, all of those things that exist in the ERP system. So again, it becomes much more of a grey area, and you have to start thinking here about the licensing options that may be relevant. So, attaching the Business Central's license to Dynamics 365 Sales or Customer Service Enterprise that Rich talked about earlier, that might be something that you need to consider in this scenario. And still I say might, because again, there is no clear definition, there's no clear guidance from Microsoft. I think if we just take this scenario a little bit further, and we talk about potentially here adding another person in to the mix, and that, we've turned on the synchronization. The role of that person is to process sales orders on behalf of the very busy sales people. And once the deal is done and they're using Dynamics 365 to do that, you are probably much more closer to multiplexing than you are if you are purely allowing the salespeople to do this themselves. And what's really interesting is there's enable sales order processing integration piece on the Microsoft documentation in Microsoft Learn. And it says you only need a Dynamics 365 Sales Enterprise or Premium license to execute. And this kind of functionality, and it kind of says that you're only going to be multiplexing if you are using Dynamics 365 Business Central. You can integrate this with other ERP systems and you're absolutely fine, but they have this own kind of limitation on their own. So again, we think it's a grey area. However, the final piece, let's say you write a custom Power App for a contractor to do all of the things that those salespeople are doing. And that accesses data in sales, it accesses the data in Business Central. At that point, you have to think that you probably are multiplexing. And the key to it here is that you would be writing a custom app, let's say to get around functionality in Business Central. So they're going in, they're using the synchronized data, they're updating things in the Power App specifically to enable, or to mean that would mean that the salespeople didn't need a Business Central license. At that point, you probably are multiplexing. And I think that's the key to it. You will know. Imagine if Business Central was on the left-hand side of that diagram, and it was the modular piece. Those sales people and those customer service people, they share accounts and contacts, but the salespeople don't need a customer service license, and the customer service people don't need a sales license. So if Business Central was part of it from an integrated perspective, you would know whether or not the user would need a Business Central license in theory. And I think that's the key to it. You would know if you were multiplexing or not. We were completely stuck, and Microsoft have made a big thing about AI. And we thought the only way we could be completely sure is let Microsoft AI tell us the answer. And based on their own definition and based on their own Bing AI, they told us that it wasn't clear whether Business Central Dataverse synchronization is considered multiplexing. So I hope that helps. That's the kind of level of things that we go to in our heads around creating applications and doing things here for to help businesses understand more. As I say, if there is questions in the chat, we'd love to hear more. I've just had a quick look and there is nothing there. So for now, Sandra, I don't know if you want to come back in, but otherwise for now, from me and for Rich, thank you very much for taking the time this morning, and we look forward to speaking to you all again soon.